We have reached the halfway point in Mark's Gospel, the end of chapter 8 and the beginning of chapter 9. This very short section, however, marks a critical moment in the narrative, a transition. Up to this point, Jesus has been milling around the Galilean countryside, doing a few miracles here and there, teaching. But now, there is a clear movement, a clear focus. The rest of the journey is set. It will be destination Jerusalem. Joseph Campbell, noted expert in myth, talks about the fact that in many of the ancient hero myths, there is a point halfway through the narrative where the hero encounters the underworld. And it is in that encounter that the hero is transformed and receives a sense of calling, a better understanding of who he is and what it is that he needs to be about. And from that point on, he sets out on the quest, refreshed and focused. I would argue that this section of Mark's Gospel functions in very much that same vein. But that's a discussion for another time. What we deal with now is that plaguing question of who Jesus is. This time the question comes from Jesus himself. He asked the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" They say, "Well, according to the polls, the leading answer is you're John the Baptist come back to life. But there's a high speculation that you might be Elijah, and a smaller grouping that feel that you're just one of the prophets." Says Jesus. That's interesting. But who do you say that I am? And it's good old Peter, who seems to always speak for the rest of the disciples in Mark's Gospel, that kind of jumps up and down saying, "I've got this one. You're the Messiah." Jesus says, "Right you are. Now don't tell anybody." It kind of catches us off guard. But it's not the first mysterious thing that Jesus has said in Mark's Gospel. So we kind of let it go. It's then that we get hit with a whammy. For Jesus then lays out the coming itinerary. He is to go to Jerusalem, where he will be arrested and beaten by the chief priests, the scribes, the religious leaders of the day. He will be killed. And 3 days later, be raised up. This is staggering news to the disciples and to us. It's not what they had signed on for. And Peter makes it clear. God forbid, Jesus. You're getting ahead of yourself. If going to Jerusalem right now is too dangerous, we don't have to go. I mean, we can hang out here in the Galilean countryside, and the officials in Jerusalem won't even pay us much attention. We can continue your ministry of preaching and teaching and miracles and continue to gather people around you. Before long, we'll have a force that is capable of taking the capital by storm. Let's just wait for a more opportune time. And Jesus' response is pretty swift. "Get behind me, Satan." Now, Satan in Scripture is not that little red guy with a pitchfork, but rather the Satan literally plays the devil's advocate. He is the one that offers up more appealing solutions to the current situation. And this is true in this instance. And then as the rabbis teach, once the Satan throws those things out, he just sits back and laughs and watches humanity struggle with their own self-interests. He must have been laughing that day. And oh, how he's laughing these days. Jesus then goes on to gather the disciples and the crowds and to explain to them very clearly, if they want to follow him, they better be ready to take up their cross and die. Because that's what it means. To follow him from here on out is risky business. One is putting one's life literally on the line. Let's not forget what happened to John the Baptist. The same thing can happen to you if you dare to follow. Jesus says, you can go ahead and try to save your life, but in the end, you'll lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. In fact, there are some of you that won't even taste death before you see the coming kingdom. 6 days later, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up a high mountain. Now, high mountains in Scripture are always opportunities for an encounter with God, and this one doesn't disappoint. While they are there, Jesus is transfigured, transformed, changed. We see this in the change of his appearance, in the clothes. They become dazzling white. And he is joined by Moses and Elijah, 2/3 of the Hebrew Scriptures, the Torah, the law, and the prophets, which has at least led me to speculate, is Jesus the third piece of that Holy Scriptures? The writings, the wisdom tradition, the understanding of faith where the law and the prophets hit the road of daily life. One could argue that Jesus' teachings are very much in line with the wisdom tradition. But that's my speculation. What's important in this story is not so much Moses and Elijah as it is the voice from heaven. For up to this point, we've had the voice of the people, the poll. We've had the voice of the disciples, you are the Messiah. And now we'll get the definitive answer, the voice of God. You are my son, the beloved. You I'm well pleased. We heard these words at Jesus' baptism, and the same sentiment is echoed over our baptisms. There is now a new relationship between us and God. No longer are we estranged, but we are intimately connected, like father and son and daughter. This is my son, the voice says, the beloved. That word beloved is an interesting word. It appears only one other time in conjunction with beloved son in the entire Old Testament, and that is with Abraham and Isaac. Isaac is the beloved son, the son whom God will ask Abraham to sacrifice. This beloved son, however, will not be spared by a scapegoat in the end, but will fulfill the sacrifice on behalf of the world. It is this new identity, or this renewed identity of Jesus, that empowers him to meet the days ahead. As the beloved one, he dares to keep the focus on the future and the journey to Jerusalem. And in good old traditional form for humanity, the disciples just want to hang out there for a while. We don't have to go, do we, Jesus? But Jesus commands them down the mountain and on with the journey. And so we follow, curious as to how this thing will play out on the road to Jerusalem.